My mother texted me to stay away because the congressman's wife was hosting and I would embarrass my sister. I almost deleted the message until I saw the name of the hostess. She was my law school roommate, and she knows exactly who I am. A standing ovation later made my family pale. But the real twist was realizing they were unknowingly socializing with the target of the federal investigation I had been building for 6 months. My name is Chloe Alexander, and for the last 3 years, my family has treated my life like a temporary illness that they hope I will eventually recover from. I sat in the fluorescent hum of the Capitol District Justice Bureau, a windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. It was 7:45 on a Tuesday evening. Most of the city was currently deciding between Pinot Noir and Cabernet, or arguing over which streaming series to binge, but I was 3 hours deep into a forensic accounting file that weighed more than a newborn baby. The case involved $150 million in misappropriated state funds, hidden behind a labyrinth of shell companies that led back to a single offshore account in the Caymans. My eyes burned. My back ached in a way that my ergonomic chair at my old firm never would have allowed. That was the trade. I gave up the ergonomic chair, the six-figure bonuses, and the glass-walled office overlooking the river for a metal desk that wobbled if I typed too hard, and the satisfaction of knowing that the bad guys I hunted actually went to prison. My phone buzzed against the laminate surface of the desk. The vibration sounded like an angry hornet in the quiet office. I glanced at the screen. It was an email notification. The sender was my mother, Eleanor. The subject line read simply, "The Gala." I should have ignored it. I had a deposition at 9 o'clock the next morning, and I needed to map out the questioning strategy for a witness who had sudden amnesia regarding his signature on 25 separate wire transfer authorizations. But the sheer brevity of the subject line hooked me. My mother was not a woman of brevity. She was a woman of elaborate, passive-aggressive paragraphs designed to suffocate you with guilt disguised as concern. I clicked open the email. Chloe, I am writing this to be direct because subtle hints do not seem to penetrate that new life of yours. Do not come to the Meridian Grand tomorrow night. Your sister is the chairwoman this year. This is her night. We have invited the Greenbergs, the Harpers, and the entire board of the foundation. The atmosphere will be high society and expensive. Frankly, we do not want to explain why you are wearing a suit from 3 seasons ago, or why you are still working for that government agency. Let's just say we are sparing you the embarrassment, and sparing Lila the stress. Stay home. We will tell everyone you are busy with a case. Love, Mom. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked, mocking me. It was not the cruelty that surprised me. I was used to the cruelty. It was the audacity. They called my career at the Justice Bureau my lost phase. In my mother's mind, I was currently wandering through a spiritual and financial desert, having foolishly abandoned the oasis of Hartwell and Crane, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the state. She told her friends I was taking a sabbatical to find myself. She never told them I left because I got tired of helping pharmaceutical companies patent ways to charge dying people 3,000% markups on insulin. Before I could process the rage simmering in my chest, a text message followed. This one was from Lila. Please tell me you got Mom's email. I know it sounds harsh, but please, Chloe. Grant has investors coming, serious money. If you start talking about indictments or corruption or whatever depressing thing you do now, you will kill the vibe. This is my chance. Do not ruin this for me. I set the phone down and rubbed my temples. Lila, my little sister, the one who used to follow me around the backyard, begging to play whatever game I was leading. Now she was 32, married to Grant Hollis, and desperate to cement her place in the upper echelon of the city's social circuit. Grant was a wealth management consultant, a title that meant he wore Italian loafers and knew how to make people feel anxious about their retirement portfolios. Together, they were the golden couple. I was the cautionary tale. I looked at my calendar on the wall. The date was circled in red marker. Wednesday, October 15th, the Meridian Grand Charity Gala. I had not planned on going. I truly had not. I had the hearing the next morning. I had a mountain of discovery documents to review. I had a cat that required feeding and a bottle of cheap but decent red wine waiting on my counter. The idea of putting on a dress, standing in heels for 4 hours, and listening to rich people congratulate themselves for being rich sounded like torture. But then I looked at the attachment my mother had forwarded in the email chain, likely by accident. It was the digital invitation. The design was elegant. Heavy cream font on a navy background, gold leaf accents. It screamed old money. I scanned the details, my eyes glazing over the ticket prices: $5,000 for a plate, $50,000 for a table, until I reached the bottom of the invitation. Hosted by the Honorable Ethan Hale and Mrs. Hale. I froze. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting as if the pixels might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. Ethan Hale, the new congressman for the 4th District. Young, charismatic, running on a platform of family values and economic reform. I knew the name. Everyone knew the name. He was the golden boy of the political scene right now. But it was the Mrs. Hale part that made my heart hammer against my ribs. I opened a new tab on my browser and typed in the congressman's name. The search results populated instantly. Images of him shaking hands, cutting ribbons, kissing babies. And there, standing beside him in photo after photo, was a woman with sharp cheekbones, intelligent eyes, and a smile that I knew better than my own. Victoria Hale. But to me, she was just Vic. A memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. 10 years ago, the law library at Georgetown. It was 2 o'clock in the morning during finals week of our first year. I was having a panic attack in the stacks, hyperventilating between rows of dusty tort law encyclopedias because I was convinced I was going to fail contracts. I was crying so hard I could not breathe. Victoria had found me. She did not coddle me. She did not tell me it would be okay. She sat down on the floor in her sweatpants, handed me a bottle of lukewarm Gatorade, and said, "Chloe, get up. If you fail, we both look bad, and I do not look bad." She stayed up with me until dawn. She quizzed me until my brain bled. She made me coffee that tasted like battery acid. She saved me. We were roommates for 3 years. We shared clothes, secrets, and a profound hatred for property law. We were inseparable until graduation sent us to different coasts and different lives. I knew she had married a politician. I knew she had moved back to the capital. But I had been so buried in my work at the bureau, so consumed by the endless stream of corruption cases, that I had not connected the dots. I had not realized she was that wife hosting this gala. We had lost touch, not because of a fight, but because of the slow, quiet erosion of adulthood. Life got in the way. I went into corporate law and then left it to become a crusader on a government salary. She went into the nonprofit sector and then married into a dynasty. I looked back at my mother's email. The congressman's wife is hosting. My mother and Lila were terrified that I would embarrass them. They thought my presence would tarnish the pristine image they were trying to project to the Hales and their wealthy friends. They wanted to present themselves as the perfect family, the successful husband, the beautiful wife, the philanthropic parents. I was the stain on the portrait, the daughter who turned her back on money to chase criminals. But they did not know. They did not know that the woman they were desperate to impress, the woman holding the keys to the social kingdom they wanted to enter, was the same woman who used to borrow my mascara and eat cold pizza with me on a mattress on the floor. A cold, sharp realization settled in my stomach. My family was not banning me because they were ashamed of me. Well, they were. But that was not the only reason. They were banning me because they needed to control the narrative. They needed to be the ones who defined who the Alexander family was. If I walked in there, wearing my off-the-rack suit and speaking with the blunt honesty that my job required, I would shatter the illusion. I picked up my phone again. My thumb hovered over the Contacts app. I scrolled down, past the endless list of federal agents, forensic accountants, and court clerks. I scrolled all the way down to the V's, Victoria Law School. The number was 8 years old. There was a 90% chance she had changed it. People in her position changed numbers like they changed designer handbags to avoid the press. But Victoria was sentimental. She kept things. She kept the ticket stubs from our first concert. She kept the dried flower from her graduation bouquet. I hesitated. This was petty. This was childish. I was a 35-year-old assistant district attorney. I should just delete the email, go home, feed my cat, and prepare for my hearing. I should let Lila have her night. I should let my mother feel superior. Then I looked at the line in my mother's email again. We are sparing you the embarrassment, as if my life, the life I chose, the life where I actually made a difference, was something to be hidden in the attic. I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile I wore when I found the one email that proved a CEO knew about the embezzlement. I tapped the message icon. I typed a simple sentence. I did not explain. I did not apologize for the years of silence. Victoria would hate that. She liked directness. Hey Vic, long time. Do you have any VIP tickets left for tomorrow? I hit send. I placed the phone face down on the desk, like a gambler throwing the dice on a craps table. The office was silent. The hum of the refrigerator in the break room seemed to grow louder. I waited. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes passed. My confidence began to waver. She was the wife of a congressman. She was hosting a gala for hundreds of the city's elite. She probably had an assistant screening her texts. She probably did not even use this number anymore. I was an idiot. I was about to be the woman who tried to crash a party she was explicitly uninvited from, only to be turned away at the door. I reached for the phone to delete the thread, to erase the evidence of my moment of weakness. The screen lit up. Incoming call, Victoria Law School. I stared at it. She was not texting back. She was calling. My heart did a strange flip in my chest. I picked up the phone and swiped green. Hello? Chloe Alexander. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was deeper than I remembered, polished by years of cocktail parties and speeches, but the cadence was the same. It was warm, commanding, and laced with amusement. I was wondering when you were going to surface. Vic, I said, leaning back in my squeaky chair. I see you made the VIP list. I am the list, she laughed, and the sound washed away 8 years of distance. I saw your name wasn't on the RSVP. I asked my assistant why the best lawyer I know wasn't coming. My family thinks I'm busy, I said, choosing my words carefully. Your family, Victoria repeated. Her tone shifted. It became sharper. She knew about my family. She knew about the pressure, the expectations, the way my mother could dismantle my self-esteem with a single glance. She had seen the aftermath of their phone calls during law school. Let me guess. Eleanor involved? Eleanor is very involved, I said. She thinks I'm going through a phase. A phase, Victoria snorted. You are an assistant district attorney. Chloe, you are taking down bad guys while she is worrying about floral arrangements. I saw the news about that indictment last month, the pharmaceutical fraud. That was you, wasn't it? I paused. How did you know? I keep tabs, she said simply. I always keep tabs on the competition. I'm not competition, I said. I'm government. We're on the same side. Are we? She paused, and for a second, the line went quiet. Listen, Chloe, I want you there. Not just because I miss your face, which I do, but because this gala, it is full of sharks. I need someone in the room who doesn't want something from me. I might want a drink, I said. You can have the whole bar, she promised. I'm adding you to the list, +1. Or are you still married to your job? Just me, I said. And Vic, my family doesn't know. Doesn't know what? That we know each other. They think I'm just the black sheep sister who ruins the aesthetic. There was a silence on the other end. Then, a slow, dangerous chuckle. Oh, Victoria said. Oh, this is going to be fun. They have been trying to kiss my ring for weeks. Your sister sent me a gift basket the size of a small car. She wants into the inner circle so badly she can taste it. She thinks if she pulls this gala off, Grant gets investors and she gets social immunity, I explained. Grant Hollis? Victoria said the name with a strange inflection. Right. The husband. He's interesting. Something in her voice pricked my prosecutor's instinct. Interesting how. We can talk about that later. She dismissed it, but I filed the tone away. Be there at 7. Wear something that makes you feel dangerous. I'll handle the door. Thanks, Vic, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. Don't thank me yet, she said. Just promise me one thing. Anything. When you walk in, keep your head up. You are the smartest person in that room. Chloe, don't let them make you forget that. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. My hand was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I looked at my mother's email one last time. Do not come. I looked at the stack of files on my desk, the fraud case, the lies, the people who thought they were untouchable because they had money and connections. I stood up and grabbed my coat. I was going home. I needed to sleep. I had a hearing in the morning, and tomorrow night I had a gala to attend. I was not going for revenge. Not really. I was going because for the first time in 3 years, I was tired of hiding in the shadows to make them comfortable in the light. If they wanted to play social games, fine, but I was bringing a player they had forgotten to account for. I walked out of the office, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind me with a sound of finality. The game was on. 3 years ago. I was a very different version of Chloe Alexander. I was a person who measured her worth in billable hours and the thread count of her business suits. I sat in a corner office on the 42nd floor of the Hartwell and Crane building, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the city I was currently helping to exploit. My life then was a series of shiny, hollow victories. I was on the partner track. That was the holy grail. It meant I was one of the chosen few who would eventually share in the profits of defending chemical companies that poisoned groundwater and tech giants that sold user data to the highest bidder. My business card was thick and embossed. My salary was the kind of number that made people choke on their drinks when they heard it. I was making $300,000 a year, with bonuses that could buy a small house in the suburbs. I remember the day I walked away from it. It was a Tuesday, much like the one where I received my mother's email. I had just won a motion to dismiss a class action lawsuit against a landlord who had knowingly exposed 50 families to asbestos. Technically, it was a brilliant legal maneuver. I had found a loophole in the filing deadline. I had saved the client millions. My senior partner, a man named Sterling who smelled of expensive scotch and moral decay, clapped me on the shoulder and told me I was a killer. He meant it as a compliment. I went to the bathroom and threw up. I stared at myself in the mirror under the harsh vanity lights. My skin was pale. My eyes were dead. I looked like a very expensive ghost. I realized then that I could not do it for one more day. I could not be the person who used the law as a weapon against the weak. When I resigned, Sterling looked at me as if I had announced I was joining a circus. He asked if it was a breakdown. He offered me a sabbatical. He offered me more money. I took a job at the Capital District Justice Bureau the following week. The pay cut was violent. I went from $300,000 to $85,000 overnight. I traded my glass office for a cubicle shared with a paralegal who ate tuna fish every day for lunch. I traded my expense account lunches for sandwiches wrapped in foil. The hours were longer, the resources were scarce, and the coffee was sludge. But the victims were real. When I won a case now, it did not mean a corporation got richer. It meant a grandmother got her pension back. It meant a corrupt city councilman went to jail. It meant the law was actually doing what it was designed to do. My family, however, treated my career change like a funeral. I remember the first dinner I attended after the switch. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the head of the table, cutting her steak with surgical precision. She did not look at me. She addressed the air above my head. She said that I was going through a phase. She told the guests that I was burnt out and needed to do something charitable for a while before returning to the real world. To Eleanor, public service was not a career. It was a penance. It was something you did if you could not hack it in the big leagues. She viewed my drop in income not as a sacrifice, but as a failure of ambition. In her world, if you were not making money, you did not matter. My father was worse. He did not criticize. He just went silent. He was a man who placed reputation on the dinner table alongside the salt and pepper. He liked being able to say his daughter was at Hartwell and Crane. It sounded good on the golf course. Saying his daughter was a bureaucrat at a state agency did not have the same ring to it. So, he simply stopped talking about me. I became a non-entity in his conversations. But Lila was the one who surprised me. My younger sister blossomed the moment I stepped out of the spotlight. For our entire lives, I had been the smart one, the successful one, the one with the law degree and the high-powered job. Lila had struggled to find her footing. She had dabbled in art, in fashion, in event planning. She had always felt like she was living in my shadow. When I fell from grace, the sun finally hit her face. Suddenly, Lila was the successful one. She launched her boutique interior design studio, catering to the new money crowd that was flooding the city. She started dating Grant Hollis. Grant was perfect, too perfect. He was 42, handsome in a catalog model sort of way, and spoke in paragraphs that sounded like they had been approved by a PR team. He was a wealth management consultant. He wore bespoke suits and knew the vintage of every wine on the menu. He treated Lila like a trophy, and she loved every second of it. They got married 6 months after I left the firm. They bought a sprawling colonial in the Heights, the kind of neighborhood where the homeowners association fines you if your grass is half an inch too long. Lila stepped into the role of the society wife with frightening ease. She joined the junior league. She chaired committees. She became the woman my mother always wanted me to be. I, on the other hand, moved into a fourth-floor walk-up in the East End. My apartment was 600 square feet. The radiator clanked like a dying engine in the winter, and the view from my single window was a brick wall. But it was mine. I paid the rent with money I earned by putting fraudsters behind bars. I learned a new way of living, a quieter, sharper way. At the big firm, my biggest worry was a paper cut. At the bureau, I was investigating organized crime syndicates and politicians who had friends in low places. I learned to check my rearview mirror every time I drove home. I learned to vary my route. I learned to never sit with my back to the door in a restaurant. I lived with secrets. I had names in my head that I could never speak aloud. I saw evidence photos that would make my mother faint. I knew which construction companies were fronts for money laundering and which charities were actually slush funds for drug cartels. This reality created a canyon between me and my family. When I went to Sunday dinners, which I did out of a masochistic sense of obligation, I had nothing to say. Lila would talk for 20 minutes about the shade of beige she chose for a client's living room. Grant would talk about market volatility and his golf handicap. My mother would nod and smile, glowing with pride at their material success. Then, inevitably, someone would turn to me. "So, Chloe," my father would say, clearing his throat. "Any plans to go back to private practice? Sterling asked about you the other day." "I am happy where I am, Dad," I would say. "But surely you are tired of the grit," my mother would add, wrinkling her nose. "It is so sordid, dealing with criminals all day, and the pay. Chloe, how do you live?" "I live fine," I would answer, cutting a piece of dry chicken. They never asked about the cases. They never asked if I was making a difference. They never asked if I was safe. To them, my work was dirty. It was beneath them. They wanted me to be a corporate shark because sharks were respected. They did not want a watchdog. Watchdogs barked, and barking was rude. There was only one person from my past who asked the right question: Victoria Hale. I ran into her about 6 months into my new job, long before the gala invitation, before I knew she was the congressman's wife. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop near the courthouse. She looked expensive, as always, but her eyes were kind. We sat down for 10 minutes. I told her I left the firm. I told her I was working for the bureau. I expected the same look of pity my family gave me. Instead, Victoria leaned forward. She looked at the dark circles under my eyes and the cheap suit I was wearing. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not are you crazy? Not are you broke? Are you okay?" "I am tired," I admitted to her, something I would never say to my mother. But I can sleep at night. Victoria had smiled then, a real smile. Then you are winning. Chloe, most of the people we went to law school with cannot say that. That interaction stayed with me. It was a lifeline. But back in the present, staring at my reflection in the darkened window of my small apartment, the truth of my situation settled over me like a heavy coat. My family did not exile me because I had failed. If I had been fired from the big firm for incompetence, they would have rallied around me. They would have covered it up, found me a new job, and protected me. Failure was acceptable as long as it could be fixed. No, my sin was much greater than failure. My sin was that I had rejected their definition of success. I had looked at the life they worshiped, the money, the status. The blind eye turned to injustice, and I had said no. I had walked away, and by walking away, I held up a mirror to their choices, my existence, my small apartment, and my $85,000 salary were a constant reminder that there was another way to live, a way that did not require selling your soul. That was why Lila did not want me at the gala. It was not just about the clothes or the potential for awkward conversation. It was because when I walked into a room, I brought the truth with me. And people like Grant Hollis, people who built their lives on shiny surfaces and hidden ledgers, were terrified of the truth. I looked at the invitation on my screen again. Lila wanted to shine. She wanted her moment as the benevolent hostess, the queen of the ball. She wanted Grant to close his deal with his investors. I thought about the file on my desk at work, the file labeled Project Horizon. The investigation into a fraudulent investment scheme that was preying on the city's wealthy elite. The investigation that had led me to a web of shell companies that were dangerously close to the people my sister was trying to impress. I was not just going to the gala to reconnect with an old roommate. I was going because I was a prosecutor. And usually, where there was this much smoke, this much desperation to keep someone like me out of the room. There was a fire. I turned off the light in my kitchen. I checked the lock on my front door. I checked the window. Force of habit. Tomorrow night, I would step back into their world, but I would not be the Chloe they remembered. I would not be the failed lawyer or the jealous sister. I was the one person in the room who knew how to read the fine print. And I had a feeling that tomorrow night, the fine print was going to be very interesting. The phone in my hand vibrated again, breaking the silence of the nearly empty office. It was a text message from Victoria. Following up on our call. It is done. You are on the VIP list. I put you at the head table. But do not panic. I moved some donors around so you are not sitting next to the ice sculpture. I really want to see you. Chloe. I stared at the screen, a small smile touching my lips. It was classic Victoria, efficient, generous, and slightly bossy. But then a second message popped up, a blue bubble that made my smile vanish instantly. Quick question. Does your family know we lived together for 3 years? I mentioned your name to your sister when she dropped off the auction items earlier this week, and she looked at me like I was speaking Greek. She had no idea who I was referencing. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking under me. No, they did not know. The realization washed over me, cold and clinical. It was not that I had actively hidden Victoria from them. I had not buried her existence in some deep vault of secrets. It was simply that they had never asked. During those 3 years of law school, my conversations with my mother, Eleanor, were transactional. She would call on Sunday evenings, usually with a glass of Chardonnay audible in her voice. She would ask about my grades. She would ask if I had secured a summer associate position at a top-tier firm. She would ask if I was dating anyone with a trust fund. She never asked who I lived with. She never asked who held my hair back when I had the flu during midterms. She never asked who proofread my briefs or who split the cost of late-night takeout Thai food with me, to Eleanor and my father. My life outside of my academic performance was irrelevant. It was just background noise to the main event, which was my eventual ascension to the tax bracket they deemed acceptable. I typed a reply to Victoria. No, they do not know. We never really talked about the details of my life back then. They only cared about the results. I hit send. It was a sad admission, but it was the truth. My family knew the version of me that existed on paper. They knew my GPA. They knew my starting salary at Hartwell and Crane. They knew my job title, but they did not know me. And because they did not know me, they did not know that the woman they were currently bending over backwards to impress was the same woman who used to borrow my oversized sweaters. "You have that look on your face," a voice said from the doorway of my cubicle. I looked up. It was Leo, the junior file clerk who sat across from me. He was 24, sharp as a tack, and wore hoodies to work whenever the supervisors were not looking. He was holding a stack of redacted bank statements. "What look?" I asked. "The look that says you are plotting a murder," Leo said, dropping the files on my desk. "Or that you just found out the coffee machine is broken again. Both are valid reasons for that expression." "My mother banned me from a charity gala," I said. The words sounded ridiculous as soon as they left my mouth. Leo blinked. He pulled up a spare chair and sat down backwards on it. "I am sorry. She did what— Are you 12 years old?" "Apparently," I said. "My sister is running it. My mother thinks my presence will lower the property value of the room. They sent me an email and a text. It was a coordinated attack." Leo shook his head, looking delighted by the drama. "That sounds like a movie. A really bad made-for-television movie. The kind my grandmother watches. So, are you staying home?" "No," I said, tapping my phone against the desk. "I am going." "Scandalous," Leo grinned. "Crash the party? Flip a table. I love it." "I am not going to flip a table. Leo, I'm going to drink free champagne and say hello to an old friend." "Right," Leo said, standing up. "Just remember, if you get arrested for trespassing, do not call me. I have student loans. I cannot afford bail." He walked away, chuckling to himself. His reaction grounded me. To an outsider, my family's behavior was absurd. It was comical. It was not the crushing moral judgment my mother wanted it to be. It was just a petty power play by people who had too much time and too much insecurity. But before I could fully commit, I needed to clear it. I worked for the government. There were rules. There were optics. I walked down the hall to the corner office. The door was open. Bureau Chief Miller was inside, reading a brief. He was a man of few words, with gray hair and a permanent furrow between his brows. He looked like he had been born wearing a tie. "Sir," I said, knocking on the doorframe. "Do you have a minute?" Miller looked up over his reading glasses. "Make it 30 seconds. Alexander." "I have been invited to the Meridian Grand Charity Gala tomorrow night," I said. "It is being hosted by Congressman Hale. My sister is the chairwoman. I know we have active inquiries into financial sectors that overlap with some of the donor list. I wanted to make sure my attendance would not be a conflict." Miller took off his glasses. He looked at me for a long moment. "Who invited you?" "The hostess," I said. "Mrs. Hale. We went to law school together." Miller raised an eyebrow. That was the most emotion I had seen from him in 6 months. "You know Victoria Hale?" "Yes, sir." "She is a sharp woman," Miller said. He tapped his pen on the desk. "Go. It is good for the Bureau to have a face in those rooms. Remind them we are not just nameless suits in a basement. It helps with cooperation when we need to serve subpoenas later." "Understood," I said. "But Alexander," Miller added, his voice dropping an octave, "keep your ears open, and keep your mouth shut about Project Horizon. That room will be full of people who would pay a lot of money to know what we know." "I know the rules, sir." "Good. Have fun. Try not to indict anyone before dessert." I walked back to my desk, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. My boss, the man who knew exactly what kind of dangerous work I did, trusted me to walk into a room full of sharks. My family, the people who raised me, did not trust me to hold a wine glass without embarrassing them. The contrast was so sharp it almost cut. I packed up my bag. It was nearly 9 o'clock. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past my window. When I got to my apartment, I threw my keys in the bowl and went straight to my closet. I did not have a wardrobe full of gowns anymore. When I left the firm, I stopped buying clothes that cost more than my rent, but I had kept a few things, classics, investment pieces that did not age. I pushed aside the sensible gray suits and the wool coats. My mother's text message from earlier in the evening flashed in my mind. Your presence will make people uncomfortable. I stopped and stared at the hangers. Uncomfortable. That was her favorite weapon. She used social discomfort like a scalpel. She wanted me to feel like a foreign object, something that did not fit, something that scratched and irritated the smooth surface of her perfect life. She wanted me to believe that I was the problem, that my job, my choices, my very existence was an affront to polite society. But why would they be uncomfortable? Because I was a failure. No, a failure they could pity, a failure they could parade around and say, "Oh, poor Chloe. She tried so hard." They would be uncomfortable because I was a mirror. I pulled out a black dress from the back of the closet. It was a sheath dress, structured, architectural, with a neckline that slashed across the collarbone. It was severe. It was elegant. It was not a dress you wore to be looked at. It was a dress you wore to be listened to. I held it up against myself in the full-length mirror on the back of my bedroom door. It fit. I did not need to buy anything new. I did not need to drape myself in sequins or tulle to prove I belonged there. Lila would be wearing something loud, something that screamed, "Look at me." I have arrived. I would wear black. I would look like exactly what I was, a woman who dealt in facts, in hard truths, and in consequences. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the invitation on my phone one last time. The congressman's wife is hosting. For 3 years, I had let my family dictate the terms of our estrangement. I had let them push me to the margins. I had let them pretend I was invisible because it was easier than fighting them. I had told myself I was being the bigger person. But tonight, sitting in my quiet apartment with the city humming outside, I realized I had not been being the bigger person. I had been hiding. I was done hiding. I was not going to the Meridian Grand to ruin Lila's night. I was not going to cause a scene or throw a drink in Grant's face, no matter how much he might deserve it. I was not going for revenge. Revenge was messy, and I was a professional. I was going to stop being a ghost in my own life. If they wanted to treat me like a shameful secret, that was their choice. But secrets only had power when they stayed in the dark. Tomorrow night, I was stepping into the light. I turned off the bedside lamp. The darkness of the room felt different tonight. It did not feel lonely. It felt like the quiet before a storm. I closed my eyes, but sleep was a long way off. My mind was already in that ballroom. I could hear the clinking of crystal. I could smell the expensive perfume. I could see the look on Lila's face when I walked through the doors. Let them be uncomfortable, I thought. If the truth made them uncomfortable, then maybe they should stop living a lie. I drifted off with a single thought anchoring me. Tomorrow, I would not be Chloe the disappointment. I would not be Chloe the black sheep. I would be Chloe Alexander, Assistant District Attorney, and I was on the list. The Meridian Grand Hotel did not just smell of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. It smelled of leverage. I stepped out of the rideshare 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, letting the cool October air settle the adrenaline that was spiking in my blood. When I rounded the corner, the hotel entrance was a fortress of light. Massive floodlights cut through the night, illuminating a red carpet that looked more like a vein of blood pulsing into the heart of the building. The noise hit me first. It was a specific kind of roar, the sound of 500 people who all believed they were the most important person in the room. There was the rapid-fire click of camera shutters, the heavy thud of car doors closing on limousines, and the murmur of polite, guarded conversation. I paused at the edge of the velvet rope. I was wearing the black sheath dress. It was sharp, severe, and blended into the shadows, which was exactly what I wanted. I did not have diamonds dripping from my ears. I did not have a clutch purse that cost more than a Honda Civic. I had my ID, my phone, and a singular purpose. I walked toward the entrance. The security guard, a man with a neck the size of a tree stump, glanced at me. I saw his eyes flicker down to my shoes, simple black pumps, and then up to my face. He was assessing my net worth in a microsecond. It was a skill people in this city developed early. "Name," he grunted. holding a clipboard that looked heavy enough to be a weapon. "Chloe Alexander," I said, my voice steady. "I am on the VIP list." He paused. He did not look for my name in the general admissions section. He flipped the page to the front. His finger traced down the line, and then stopped. His eyebrows went up a fraction of an inch. "Welcome, Ms. Alexander," he said, unhooking the velvet rope. "Right this way. The Hales are receiving guests in the atrium." I stepped onto the carpet. The flashes went off. Blinding white explosions in my peripheral vision. The photographers did not know who I was. They were just reacting to movement, hungry for anyone who might be someone. I kept my head high, eyes forward, refusing to blink. I had walked into federal courtrooms with less anxiety than this. But in a courtroom, the rules were written down. Here, the rules were invisible and changed depending on how much money you had in the bank. Inside, the atrium was a cavern of marble and gold. A string quartet was playing something by Vivaldi, but it was barely audible over the din of networking. This was not a party. It was a marketplace. I saw a real estate developer shaking hands with a zoning commissioner. I saw a hospital administrator laughing too loudly at a joke made by a pharmaceutical rep. Every handshake was a contract. Every smile was a down payment on a future favor. And then, I saw her. Lila. My sister was standing at the center of the receiving line, positioned perfectly under the massive crystal chandelier, so that the light caught the sequins on her emerald green gown. She looked breathtaking. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon. Her makeup was flawless, and she was radiating the kind of manic, high-wattage joy that comes from finally getting exactly what you think you want. Grant was beside her, looking like a catalog model for successful husbandry. He was nodding at a donor, his hand resting possessively on the small of Lila's back. They were the image of the American dream, young, beautiful, and rich. I felt a pang of something complicated in my chest. Not jealousy. I did not want her life, but there was a sadness there. Seeing how hard she was working to maintain the facade, she was vibrating with tension. I could see it in the way her fingers gripped the stem of her champagne flute, white-knuckled and desperate. I took a breath and began to move through the crowd. I was a shark moving through a reef of tropical fish. I did not stop to chat. I did not take a drink from the passing trays. I just walked. Lila spotted a couple approaching her, the CEO of a local tech giant, and his wife, and her smile widened to a beaming, terrifying degree. She did not see me. She was too focused on the prize. But someone else saw me. "Chloe." The voice cut through the ambient noise like a bell. It came from behind the receiving line, from the area reserved for the hosts. Before I could react, a figure in midnight blue silk separated from the VIP cluster and moved toward me with a speed that defied her heels. Victoria Hale. She looked different than she had in law school. The messy bun was replaced by a sleek blowout. The sweatpants were gone, replaced by a gown that probably cost $20,000, but the eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and currently filled with genuine warmth. She reached me before I reached the line. She did not offer a handshake. She did not offer a polite air kiss. She wrapped her arms around me in a fierce, solid hug that knocked the wind out of me. "You finally came," she whispered into my ear, smelling of expensive jasmine and old money. "I was betting Ethan $50 you would bail at the last second." I hugged her back, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders melt away for a brief second. "I considered it," I admitted, pulling back. "But I realized I owed you a drink for getting me through torts." Victoria laughed, holding me at arm's length to inspect me. "You look dangerous. Chloe, I love it. Black suits you. It says, 'I am here to depose you,' not 'I am here to flatter you.'" "That is generally the vibe I go for," I said. Victoria linked her arm through mine. "Come on. You have to say hello to Ethan. He has been dying to meet the legend." She turned us around, and that was when it happened. We were standing 10 feet away from Lila. My sister had just finished laughing at the tech CEO's joke. She turned her head, scanning the room for the next important person to charm, and her eyes landed on us. The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. Her smile did not fade. It froze. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on a video. Her eyes widened, the pupils contracting into pinpricks of pure panic. She looked at me, then at Victoria, then back at me. Her brain could not compute the image. In her world, I was the embarrassing sister who worked in a basement office. Victoria was the wife of a congressman, a woman Lila had been trying to court for months. The two of us should not be linking arms. We should not exist in the same frame. Lila excused herself from the tech CEO with a frantic little wave and rushed over to us. Her movements were jerky, disjointed. Grant noticed her sudden departure and frowned, scanning the room until he saw me. His face went blank. "Mrs. Hale," Lila said, her voice breathless and pitched about an octave too high. She ignored me completely, focusing her laser beam intensity on Victoria. "I am so glad you found my sister." She said the word sister like it was a diagnosis. Victoria smiled. But it was not the warm smile she had given me. It was her politician's wife smile, bright, polished, and not reaching her eyes. "Lila, you have outdone yourself with the decor. The floral arrangements are stunning." "Thank you," Lila gushed, her hands fluttering. Then she turned to me, and the mask slipped. Her eyes were hard, pleading and furious all at once. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" The question was a hiss, barely audible over the music. "I am attending the gala," I said simply. "But Mom said—" Lila started, then caught herself, glancing nervously at Victoria. "I mean, we thought you were busy with work. You are always so busy with your administrative things." She was doing it again, diminishing me, framing my work as small, boring, and irrelevant. She wanted Victoria to know that I was nobody special, just a bureaucrat who pushed paper. "I made time," I said. "Did you buy a ticket?" Lila asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Chloe, the tickets were $5,000. If you needed help, you should have asked. But just showing up—" "She did not buy a ticket," Victoria interrupted. Her voice was light, conversational, but there was steel underneath it. Lila looked relieved. "Oh, well, surely we can find a seat for her in the back. Maybe at the volunteer table." I watched Lila dig the hole. I watched her pick up the shovel and start tossing dirt over her own head. She assumed I had crashed. She assumed I was a charity case. Victoria tightened her grip on my arm. "Lila," Victoria said, and the tone of her voice made my sister freeze. "I invited Chloe. She is my guest." Lila blinked. "Your guest?" "Yes," Victoria continued, looking from me to Lila with a gaze that dissected the situation with surgical precision. "I was surprised when you didn't mention her. I assumed you knew." "Knew what?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "That Chloe and I lived together for 3 years in law school," Victoria said. The silence that followed was deafening, even in the noisy room. Lila's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked as if Victoria had just spoken to her in an alien language. "Roommates," Lila squeaked. "Best friends," Victoria corrected. She practically dragged me across the graduation stage. I would not have passed constitutional law without her notes. Honestly, Lila, you have been hiding a national treasure. I had no idea Chloe Alexander was your sister until I saw the guest list draft." Lila's face drained of color. I could see the gears turning in her head, grinding against the rust of her own lies. She had spent months, maybe years, curating a specific image of our family. In that image, she was the star, and I was the cautionary tale. She had likely told Victoria and everyone else in this room that I was struggling, that I was lost, that I was a low-level clerk in a county office, and now, the congressman's wife, the most powerful woman in the room, was declaring me her equal, her savior. Even, I didn't know," Lila stammered. "Chloe never mentions things." "She is humble," Victoria said, looking at me with a smirk. "It is her best and worst quality." Before Lila could recover, a shadow fell over us. Grant had arrived. He moved with that practiced, slippery grace of a man who knows how to blend into expensive surroundings. He placed a hand on Lila's shoulder, squeezing it slightly. "Mrs. Hale," Grant said, flashing a smile that showed too many teeth. "And, Chloe, this is a surprise." "Grant?" I said, nodding. "We were just catching up," Victoria said. "I was telling Lila how Chloe and I go way back." Grant's eyes flickered to me. There was a calculation there. He was quicker than Lila. He realized instantly that the power dynamic had shifted. He did not look shocked. He looked wary. "Is that so?" Grant said. "Small world." "Tiny," Victoria said. Then she looked over my shoulder and waved. "Ethan, come here." The crowd parted. It literally parted. Congressman Ethan Hale walked toward us. He was taller than he looked on television, with the kind of jawline that won elections. He was shaking hands as he moved, but his focus was on his wife. When he reached us, he kissed Victoria on the cheek and then turned his attention to me. He did not wait for an introduction. "You must be Chloe," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, dry, and assured. "Congressman," I said. "Please, call me Ethan," he said. He looked at me with genuine curiosity. "Victoria talks about you constantly. I feel like I know you. The story about the coffee machine explosion during finals week." "A classic." I laughed, despite the tension. "I still say that was a mechanical failure, not operator error. And the way you handled that class action suit last year," Ethan continued, his voice turning serious. "The one against the pharmaceutical distributor. I read the brief. Impressive work, really. We need more people like you in the bureau." Lila made a sound that sounded like a strangled cat. She was holding her champagne glass so tightly I thought the stem would snap. She was staring at Ethan Hale, the man she had been desperate to impress, the man whose approval she needed to secure her social standing. And he was not looking at her. He was not praising her decor. He was praising her failure of a sister for a legal victory she had never even bothered to ask me about. You know about Chloe's work," Lila whispered. Ethan looked at her, as if remembering she was there. "Of course. Your sister is building quite a reputation. Mrs. Hollis, you must be very proud. The Bureau is lucky to have her. It is not easy to walk away from a partner track at Hartwell and Crane to serve the public. That takes character." Character. The word hung in the air. My parents had called it stupidity. My sister had called it embarrassing. Ethan Hale just called it character. Lila looked at me. For the first time in 3 years. She actually looked at me, not through me. Her eyes were wide, frightened, and confused. The narrative she had built was collapsing in real time. She had told everyone I was a loser. Now, the most important man in the room was treating me like a hero. Yes, Lila stammered, her voice faint. "We are very proud." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. I could see it. "Well," Victoria said, sensing the kill but deciding to be merciful, "we should move to the table. Dinner is about to be served. Chloe, you are sitting with us." "With you?" Lila asked. "But the head table is for the host and their honored guests," Victoria said sweetly. "Come on. Chloe, I want to hear everything." Victoria steered me away. Her arm still linked with mine. Ethan followed, throwing a polite nod to Grant and Lila. "Enjoy the evening," Ethan said to them. We walked away, leaving my sister and her husband standing alone in the middle of the crowd. I glanced back once. Lila looked small. For all her sequins and her perfect hair, she looked incredibly small. She was staring at my back, her expression a mixture of shock and a dawning, terrible realization. Grant was not looking at me. He was looking at Ethan Hale's back. And his expression was not one of social anxiety. It was fear, pure, cold fear. I turned my head back to the front. My heart was pounding, but not from nerves. It was the thrill of the reveal. For years, I had let them tell the story of Chloe Alexander. I had let them edit out the parts they didn't like, the parts that challenged them. Tonight, the editing stopped. I walked toward the head table, the lights of the cameras flashing around us. I wasn't fighting with my sister. I wasn't making a scene. I was simply existing as I truly was, in the presence of people who knew my value. And as I took my seat next to the congressman's wife, I realized something. My family's shame wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about the fact that my reality exposed their pretense, and the night was just getting started. I picked up the heavy linen napkin and placed it on my lap. Across the room, I saw my mother and father enter the ballroom. They spotted Lila. Then they spotted the head table. I saw my mother stop walking. I saw her clutch my father's arm. I raised my glass of water in a silent toast. Welcome to the show. Mother. Victoria did not let me stay seated at the head table for long. The moment I placed my napkin on my lap, she tapped my arm with a manicured fingernail. Her energy was infectious, a vibrating frequency of power and purpose that seemed to command the air around her. She told me we had rounds to make before the first course was served. She said there were people I needed to know, but the look in her eye suggested the reality was the opposite. There were people who needed to know me. We moved through the ballroom like a small weather system. The room was a sea of black ties and designer silk, a landscape of wealth that usually made me feel invisible. Tonight, however, I was anchored to the most important woman in the room, and the effect was disorienting. Our first stop was a cluster of men standing near the bar. They were older, with the kind of silver hair and posture that suggested they had not worried about a mortgage payment in 40 years. Victoria steered me right into their center. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through their conversation about capital gains taxes, "I want to introduce you to someone. This is Chloe Alexander." I prepared myself for the usual polite indifference. I prepared myself to explain that I was a lawyer, only to have them ask if I knew their nephew who did real estate law in Florida. I prepared myself to be dismissed. Instead, the tallest man in the group, a man I recognized as Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the city's largest hospital network, turned to me with a spark of recognition in his eyes. "Alexander," he repeated, rolling the name around in his mouth. Not the Alexander who handled the investigation into the Resolute pharmaceutical pricing scheme. I froze. That case was closed 6 months ago. It had made the local papers, but my name had been buried in the footnotes of the court documents. It was not the kind of thing that usually registered with the country club set. "That was my case," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Brilliant work," Arthur said, extending a hand that felt like dry parchment. "Truly, the way you traced the shell companies back to the holding firm, my general counsel sent a memo about it to our board. He used it as a case study for compliance. He said it was the most aggressive forensic accounting he had seen in 10 years. I shook his hand, feeling a flush of heat rise up my neck. It was not embarrassment. It was shock. My family did not know I had won that case. When I had tried to tell my mother about it over the phone, she had interrupted me to ask if I had seen the sale at Nordstrom. To my own blood relatives, my work was a vague, possibly shameful hobby. To this stranger, this titan of industry, my work was a case study in excellence. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said. "We just followed the money." "You did more than that," another man chimed in. He was shorter, wearing a pin on his lapel that identified him as a senior partner at a rival firm to my old one. "You scared the living daylights out of half the corporate boards in this city. Rumor has it you are currently looking into the construction sector. Is that true?" He was fishing. He was trying to get information, but there was respect in the bait. "I cannot comment on active investigations," I said, slipping automatically into my professional persona. "But I can say that if people are following the law, they have nothing to worry about." The group laughed. It was a nervous laugh, but it was genuine. They looked at me not as Lila's sister, not as a charity case, but as a predator they hoped to keep fed and happy. Victoria squeezed my arm, beaming like a proud parent, and pulled me away before I could say anything else. "Did you see his face?" Victoria whispered as we navigated around a waiter carrying a tray of crab cakes. "Arthur Sterling does not compliment anyone. He once told a senator to his face that his suit looked cheap. You own this room. Chloe, they are just being polite to the congressman's wife, I deflected. No, Victoria said firmly. They are being polite to the woman who can subpoena their emails. There is a difference. We continued our tour. It felt less like a social event and more like a victory lap I had not known I was running. We stopped to greet a woman sitting alone at a table near the stage. She had iron gray hair cut in a sharp bob and was drinking seltzer water. I recognized her instantly. It was Justice Beatrice Corcoran, a retired federal judge who was a legend in the circuit. She was known for eating rookie lawyers for breakfast. Victoria did not even have to introduce us. Judge Corcoran looked up, her eyes narrowing behind her rimless glasses. Ms. Alexander, she said. Her voice was like gravel crunching under tires. I was wondering if I would see you here. Justice Corcoran, I said, instinctively straightening my spine. It is an honor. I read your motion in the State versus Miller case, she said. She did not waste time with pleasantries. The argument regarding the admissibility of the digital evidence, it was elegant, sparse. Most lawyers these days write like they are being paid by the adjective. You write like a surgeon cuts. I felt a chill go down my spine. My family did not know I wrote motions. They thought I pushed papers. They thought I filled out forms. They had no idea that I spent nights agonizing over the placement of a comma, knowing that a single sentence could determine whether a man went to prison or walked free. That means a great deal coming from you. Justice, I said honestly. Keep doing it, she said, taking a sip of her water. The bench notices. We always notice. Victoria guided me away again, leaving me breathless. I looked across the room. I needed to orient myself. That was when I saw Lila. She was standing near the entrance to the kitchen, holding court with a group of junior league members, but she was not looking at them. She was looking at me. Her expression was a portrait of cognitive dissonance. She had spent 3 years building a monument to my failure. She had told her friends, her husband, and herself that I was the broken one. She needed me to be broken so she could feel whole. Now, she was watching the most powerful people in the city treat me with a reverence she had never earned. She watched Judge Corcoran nod at me. She watched Arthur Sterling laugh at my joke. She looked like a child who had discovered that the laws of gravity had suddenly stopped working. I met her gaze. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just looked at her. For a second, I saw the fear in her eyes. It was the fear of a narrator realizing she had lost control of the story. Then, the main doors opened again. My parents had arrived. Eleanor and Robert Alexander walked into the ballroom with the practiced entitlement of people who believed the party did not start until they were present. My mother was wearing a silver gown that I knew cost more than my car. My father was adjusting his cufflinks. They scanned the room, looking for Lila. They were here to bask in her reflected glory. They were here to be the parents of the chairwoman. Their eyes swept past the head table, then doubled back. I saw the moment they recognized me. I was standing next to the congressman, who had joined us for a brief moment to shake hands with a donor. Ethan was leaning in to hear something I was saying. I was holding a glass of champagne, looking calm, looking like I belonged. My mother stopped walking. A waiter nearly collided with her. She stared at me, her mouth opening slightly. My father squinted, as if checking if his prescription needed updating. They looked lost. They had a script for tonight. The script involved apologizing for my absence. It involved making vague, pitiful excuses about how I was working late on something tedious. The script did not account for me standing at the right hand of power. I saw my mother start to move toward me. Her face was arranging itself into a mask of maternal concern, the one she used when she wanted to undermine me in public. But she could not get close. Victoria saw them coming. She turned her back to them, effectively shielding me with her own body and status. She engaged me in a conversation with the dean of the law school we had attended, forcing my parents to keep their distance. They could not interrupt the congressman's wife. They had to stand on the periphery, watching their black sheep daughter be welcomed into the fold they were desperate to join. It was a quiet, devastating rejection. But amidst the triumph, I felt a weight. I felt eyes on me that were not friendly. I turned my head slightly to the left. Grant Hollis was standing by the pillar near the emergency exit. He was not with Lila. He was alone. He was holding a tumbler of scotch, but he was not drinking it. He was watching me. It was not the look of a brother-in-law who was surprised to see me. It was not the look of a man who was annoyed by a family squabble. It was a measuring look. He was studying me the way a structural engineer studies a crack in a foundation. He was assessing the risk. He was calculating the damage potential. I had known Grant was slick. I had known he was ambitious. But in that moment, under the warm glow of the chandeliers, I saw something else. I saw a man who was afraid. Why was he afraid? Because I was a prosecutor, or because of what I was prosecuting? The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The case on my desk, Project Horizon. The tangled web of investment fraud that targeted the wealthy. I had seen names in those files. Shell companies, LLCs registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. I looked at Grant. He looked at me. He did not blink. He knew. He knew that I was the one pulling the threads. He knew that I was the one asking the questions that were making his investors nervous. He had probably thought I was incompetent. He had probably believed Lila's stories about my lost phase. But now, watching me with Judge Corcoran, watching me with Arthur Sterling, he realized he had made a fatal error in judgment. I was not lost. I was hunting. I looked away from him, my heart hammering against my ribs. Suddenly, a hand touched my elbow. I jumped, spinning around. A man was standing right behind me. He was unremarkable. He wore a gray suit that fit well but was not flashy. He looked like he could be an accountant, or a lawyer, or a hitman. He had a face that you would forget 5 seconds after seeing it. He leaned in close. He did not introduce himself. "Ms. Alexander," he said. His voice was low, barely a whisper over the swell of the string quartet. "Yes," I asked, stepping back slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. He was not looking at my eyes. He was scanning the room behind me, as if checking for surveillance. "For what?" I asked. "For holding the line," he said. "On the grand jury subpoenas last week, most people would have folded under that pressure. You did not." I stared at him. The grand jury subpoenas were sealed. They were completely confidential. Nobody outside of the bureau and the judge should have known about my refusal to limit the scope of the inquiry. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice sharpening. "Just a concerned citizen," he said. A small, tight smile touched his lips. "Watch your back. Chloe, you are kicking hornet nests you cannot even see yet." Before I could grab his arm, before I could demand a name, Victoria was there. "Chloe," she chirped, oblivious to the interaction. Or maybe she was not oblivious. Maybe she was interrupting on purpose. "The mayor wants to meet you. Come, quickly." She grabbed my hand and pulled. I stumbled after her. Looking back over my shoulder, the man in the gray suit was gone. He had vanished into the crowd of tuxedos and gowns, as if he had never been there. I let Victoria drag me toward the mayor. But my mind was spinning. The gala was not just a party. It was not just a charity event for the children's hospital. It was a nexus. It was a place where money, power, and secrets intersected, and I had just walked right into the center of it. I looked at my sister, preening for a photographer. I looked at my parents, looking confused and slightly resentful near the buffet. I looked at Grant, still watching me from the shadows with cold, dead eyes. They thought this was a social game. They thought this was about reputation and embarrassment. They were wrong. This was a battlefield. And I realized, with a sudden surge of clarity, that I was the only one who had brought a weapon. My weapon was the truth. My weapon was the law. But as I smiled at the mayor and shook his hand, I couldn't shake the feeling of the stranger's words. "You are kicking hornet nests you cannot even see yet." I tightened my grip on my champagne glass. Let them sting. I thought, I have dealt with worse things than hornets. "So," the mayor said, beaming at me, "Victoria tells me you are the future of the Justice Bureau." I smiled, a smile that did not reach my eyes. I am just doing my job, Mr. Mayor. Well, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Tonight, you can relax. Tonight, you are among friends. I looked around the room, at the smiles that hid teeth, at the handshakes that felt like contracts, at the family that did not know me. Yes, I lied, my voice smooth and confident. Among friends. The lie tasted metallic on my tongue. I was not among friends. I was among targets, and the night was only getting darker. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, casting a hush over the 500 guests who had just finished their appetizers. The clinking of silverware against fine china stopped, replaced by the expectant silence of a crowd waiting to be entertained. I took a sip of water, grateful for the darkness. It gave me a moment to drop the mask I'd been wearing for the last hour. My face actually hurt from smiling, from accepting compliments from people who, hours ago, would not have looked twice at me on the street. Victoria walked to the podium. A single spotlight hit her, turning her midnight blue dress into a shimmering column of water. She looked comfortable up there. While most people shrank under a spotlight, Victoria expanded. She gripped the sides of the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and waited 3 seconds before speaking. It was a power move she had learned in our moot court classes. Silence commanded attention better than noise ever could. Thank you all for being here. Her voice rang out, clear and warm, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. Tonight, we are here to raise money for the pediatric wing. We are here to sign checks that will buy equipment, fund research, and save lives. And looking around this room, I see incredible generosity. I see the captains of industry. I see the leaders of our community. She paused, her eyes scanning the front tables. But money, she continued, her tone shifting, becoming sharper, less like a hostess and more like the lawyer she used to be. Money is easy to give when you have a lot of it. It is a transaction. You give, you get a plaque, you get a tax write-off. It is noble, yes, but it is safe. I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. I knew that tone. That was the tone she used right before she dismantled an opponent's argument in a closing statement. Real service, Victoria said, leaning into the microphone, is not safe. Real service is waking up every day and choosing to fight a battle that does not pay well. It is choosing to stand between the predator and the prey. Even when the predator is powerful and the prey is forgotten, it is choosing integrity over a corner office. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Don't. I thought, Victoria, please do not do this. I have a friend in this room, Victoria said. She did not look at her notes. She looked straight ahead. We went to law school together. We studied for the bar exam on a floor covered in pizza boxes and anxiety. We both had offers from the biggest firms in the country. I took mine. I went into the nonprofit sector. I married a wonderful man, and I live a very comfortable life. She smiled, a self-deprecating expression that charmed the room. Then her face sobered. But my friend, she took the hard road. She walked away from the high salary. She walked away from the prestige. She went to the Justice Bureau. She spends her days buried in forensic audits, chasing down the people who steal from the elderly, who defraud our state, who think they are above the law. I stared at the white tablecloth, wishing I could dissolve into the fibers. Tonight, Victoria's voice boomed. My husband and I want to honor someone who isn't usually on the guest list for these events, someone who doesn't do it for the applause. She turned. Her eyes locked onto me. Chloe Alexander, she said, please stand up. The room went dead silent for a heartbeat. I did not move. My legs felt like they had been filled with concrete. This was my nightmare. I did not want the spotlight. I wanted the work. I wanted the quiet satisfaction of a closed file. Chloe, Victoria commanded, soft but firm. Stand up. I took a breath. I placed my hands on the table and pushed myself up. I stood there, feeling exposed, feeling every single pair of eyes in the room drilling into me. I expected polite applause. I expected the kind of pitying clap you give to a scholarship student. That is not what happened. It started at table 4. Justice Beatrice Corcoran, The woman who terrified half the legal community got to her feet. She began to clap. A slow, heavy, rhythmic clap. Then Arthur Sterling stood up at table 2. Then the mayor. Then, like a wave crashing against the shore, the rest of the room followed. Chairs scraped against the floor. People rose. The applause swelled, growing louder and louder until it was a physical force, a roar that vibrated in my chest. I looked around, stunned. These people were not clapping out of charity. They were clapping out of respect. They knew the cases I had worked on. They knew the long hours. They knew, perhaps better than anyone, how hard it was to stay clean in a dirty city. I felt a sudden burning behind my eyes. I blinked it away. I would not cry, not here. I looked across the room at table 12, the family table. My mother, Eleanor, was sitting down. She was one of the few people who had not risen. Her face was drained of all color. She looked as if she had just witnessed a car accident. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. She was staring at the room, at the standing ovation, and I could see her worldview cracking. In her mind, I was the failure. I was the embarrassment. How could the failure be receiving a standing ovation from the very people she worshipped? It did not compute. Next to her, my father, Robert, was standing, but he looked confused. He was clapping mechanically, looking around at his peers to see what he was supposed to do. He looked at me like I was a stranger who had just walked into his house and started speaking a language he did not understand. He had spent years ignoring me at the dinner table, and now he was realizing that the person he ignored was someone the city respected. And then there was Lila. My sister was standing. She had to stand. As the chairwoman, she could not be the only one sitting, but she was not clapping. Her hands were gripping the back of her chair so hard her knuckles were white. Her lower lip was trembling. It was not a tremble of pride. It was a tremble of devastation. Lila's entire identity, her entire brand, was built on being the good sister, the successful one, the one who made it. She needed me to be the mess, so that she could be the masterpiece. She had sold that story to her friends, to her husband, to herself. Poor Chloe. She is struggling. She is lost. But as the applause washed over us, that story evaporated. You cannot pity a woman who has the entire legal establishment standing in her honor. Lila looked at me, and I saw the terrified realization that she was no longer the sun in our family solar system. She was just a planet, and I had ignited into a star she had not anticipated. The applause finally began to fade. People sat back down, murmuring to each other. Victoria waited for the room to settle. She was not done. And, Victoria said, leaning back into the microphone, I think it is only fitting to share a little news that I heard this afternoon. It hasn't been officially announced by the Attorney General yet, but since we are all friends here, my head snapped up. What was she doing? Because of her exceptional work on the Project Horizon preliminaries, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that reached every corner of the room. Chloe Alexander is the leading candidate to head the new state anti-corruption task force. A gasp rippled through the room. I stopped breathing. I knew I was on the short list. My boss, Miller, had hinted at it. But to be the leading candidate, the task force, that was a career-defining role. It was a position that gave you the power to indict anyone, regardless of their political connections. It was a position that made you the most dangerous person in the state. The room erupted again. This time not with applause, but with chatter. People were turning to each other, whispering, pointing. The energy in the room shifted from celebratory to electric. I was no longer just a noble public servant. I was a future power player. I looked at Grant Hollis. He was sitting next to Lila. He had gone very, very still. He was not looking at me. He was staring at his water glass. He looked like a man who had just heard the sound of a guillotine blade being sharpened. If I got that job, if I became the head of the anti-corruption task force, I would have subpoena power over everything, including the shady investment funds he had been bragging about all night. Victoria beamed at me. She had just handed me a sword and a shield in front of the entire city. "To Chloe," Victoria said, raising her glass. "To Chloe." The room echoed. I sat down. My hands were shaking. I hid them in my lap. It was too much. The vindication, the shock, the sheer magnitude of what just happened. I looked at my mother. She was reaching for her wineglass, her hand trembling so badly that wine sloshed over the rim onto the white tablecloth. She didn't even notice. She couldn't look at me. The shame on her face was not for me anymore. It was for herself. She realized she had bet on the wrong horse, and she had done it publicly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I reached for my own glass. And then, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom creaked open. It was late. Dinner was already being served. Nobody arrived this late unless they didn't care about the schedule, or unless they owned the schedule. A hush fell over the back tables and rippled forward. I turned in my seat to look. A man walked in. He was flanked by two younger men who looked like bodyguards. Though they were dressed in tuxedos, the man himself was in his 60s, with silver hair and a face that was tanned to the color of expensive leather. He moved with an arrogance that sucked the air out of the room. I recognized him instantly, not from society pages, from my files. It was deeply unsettling to see a face you had only seen in surveillance photos suddenly appear in 3 dimensions. Victoria, who had been glowing with triumph just seconds ago, froze on the stage. I saw her expression shift. The warmth vanished. Her eyes narrowed into slits. Her jaw set hard. It was the look of a woman who realizes the enemy has just breached the gate. This was not a guest. This was a message. The man walked slowly through the room. He didn't look at the stage. He didn't look at the guests. He walked straight toward table 12, toward my family, toward Grant. Grant stood up. He looked terrified. He practically scrambled out of his chair to greet the man. They shook hands. The older man clapped Grant on the shoulder, a gesture that looked friendly to an observer, but looked like a threat to me. I looked back at Victoria. She was descending the stairs from the stage, moving quickly, her eyes locked on the newcomer. I sat there, my hand still gripping the stem of my glass. The standing ovation felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. The temperature in the room seemed to have dropped 10 degrees. My family thought the drama of the night was my presence. They thought the twist was my success. They were wrong. The real twist had just walked through the door, and he was shaking hands with my brother-in-law. And as I watched them, I realized that the investigation I had been building, the promotion I had just been promised, and the family drama I was living were all about to collide in a very violent way. I looked at the empty chair next to Grant where the man was sitting down. The game had just changed. We weren't playing for reputation anymore. We were playing for survival. The applause had died down, but the ringing in my ears remained. I sat at the head table, dissecting the salad on my plate with the precision of a surgeon. Though I had no appetite, the room had returned to its dull roar of conversation, but the frequency had changed. Before, the noise was about business and vanity. Now, the noise was about me. I could feel the stares. They were heavy, physical things pressing against my skin. But the heaviest stares came from table 12. I did not have to wait long. My mother, Eleanor, approached the head table. She did not walk with her usual gliding confidence. Her steps were stiff, her posture brittle. She stopped right behind my chair. She did not greet Victoria. She did not acknowledge the congressman. She leaned down, her mouth close to my ear, her voice a hissed whisper that carried the weight of 35 years of disappointment. "Why did you not say it clearly?" she asked. I turned in my seat to look at her. Her face was perfectly made up, but the powder could not hide the flush of humiliation on her neck. Her eyes were wet, not with tears of pride, but with the angry moisture of someone who feels tricked. "Say what clearly, Mother?" I asked, my voice calm. "That you were this." She gestured vaguely at the room, at the people who had just stood for me. "That you were important, that you were leading a task force." "I told you," I said. 3 years ago, I told you I was joining the Justice Bureau to prosecute financial crimes. I told you I was going after fraud. You said you were working for the state, Eleanor snapped. You said you took a pay cut. You said you were leaving the firm. I did leave the firm. You let us believe you were a clerk, she accused. You let us believe you were stamping forms in a basement. You let us talk about you like you were a charity case. I never said I was a clerk, I said, putting my fork down. You assumed I was a clerk because you cannot imagine success that does not come with a 7-figure salary. You heard civil servant, and you translated it to failure. That was your translation. Mother, not mine. You could have corrected us, she said, her voice trembling. When we offered to pay your rent last Christmas, when we offered to buy you new clothes, you just sat there. I told you I did not need your money, I said. You insisted. You needed to feel benevolent. You needed to feel like you were saving me. I just let you play the role you wanted to play. My father, Robert, appeared beside her. He looked less angry and more bewildered. He was holding a glass of scotch that was half empty. Chloe, he said, his voice blustering, trying to find a logical foothold in a situation that defied his logic. Your mother is right. It is a bit deceptive. We thought you were doing something lighter, something administrative. You never mentioned high-profile cases. There is nothing light about protecting victims. Dad, I said, cutting him off. There is nothing administrative about sending corrupt men to prison. I did not mention the cases because you never asked. Not once. You asked when I was coming back to private practice. You asked why I was driving a used car. You never asked what I actually did every day. Robert opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the congressman, who was watching this exchange with a polite, guarded expression. My father realized he could not win this argument here. He retreated into his drink. We look like fools, Eleanor whispered. Everyone is looking at us. They are wondering why we treated you like that. They call it shame, I said, looking her in the eye. People out here call it honor. It is interesting how the definition changes depending on which side of the table you sit on. Before she could respond, a hand grabbed my arm. It was not gentle. I need to talk to you, Lila said. My sister's face was a mask of panic. She did not wait for an answer. She pulled me up from the chair. I could have resisted, but I saw the desperation in her eyes and decided to grant her this one mercy. I excused myself to Victoria, who gave me a look that said, "Call for backup if you need it," and followed Lila. She dragged me away from the tables, toward the heavy velvet curtains that covered the terrace doors. It was a semi-private corner, shielded from the main room by a large potted palm. Lila spun around to face me. She was vibrating. "You ruined it," she said. Her voice was shaking. "You absolutely ruined it. I sat there and ate my salad. Lila, Victoria made the speech. I did nothing." "You made me a liar," she hissed. Tears were finally spilling over her lashes, ruining her mascara. "Do you know what I told the board? Do you know what I told the donors? I told them my sister works in records. I told them you were fragile. I told them you couldn't handle the pressure of the big city, so you took a government job to rest." I stared at her. "You told them I was fragile. I had to explain why you weren't successful," she cried. "I had to explain why the brilliant Chloe Alexander was living in a shoebox apartment. It was a better story than the truth." "What truth?" I asked. "That I have more integrity than you. That you chose to be poor," Lila shouted, then clamped a hand over her mouth. Realizing she was too loud, she lowered her voice to a venomous whisper. "You chose to step down, and now you show up here, and you are this hero, and I look like the jealous sister who lied about you. Do you know what Mrs. Vanderhoven just asked me? She asked if I was jealous of your career." "Jealous of you. Are you?" I asked. Lila froze. She looked at me, and for a second, the artifice crumbled. I saw the exhaustion. I saw the terror of maintaining a lifestyle she could barely afford, married to a man who treated her like an accessory. "I am the success," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I have the house. I have the husband. I have the life. You have a story, Leela, I said softly. You have a story you tell yourself, and tonight, the plot holes are showing. Why didn't you just stay home? She sobbed, a childish, broken sound. Why couldn't you just let me have this one night where I was the winner? Because I stopped playing your game, I said. I am not your prop. Lila, I am not the benchmark you use to measure your own height. I am your sister. And you chose a story that was easy to sell over the sister who was actually there. Lila stared at me, her chest heaving. She had no comeback for that. The truth was a wall she could not scream down. Ladies, the voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly calm. Grant Hollis stepped around the palm tree. He was smiling, but the smile did not touch his eyes. His eyes were darting around, checking to see if anyone was watching us. Everything okay? Grant asked, stepping between me and Lila. He placed a hand on Lila's shoulder, not to comfort her, but to silence her. Lila, honey, you are smudging your makeup. Why don't you go to the ladies' room and freshen up? I want to say hello to Chloe. Lila looked at him. She looked at me. She wanted to keep fighting, but the fight had gone out of her. She looked small. She nodded, wiped her face, and hurried away toward the restrooms. I was alone with Grant. He adjusted his cufflinks. He took a sip of his drink. He was trying to look casual, but I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like expensive scotch and nervous sweat. So, Grant said, leaning against the wall. Task force, huh? That is impressive. Chloe, really, I had no idea you were operating at that level. Most people do not, I said. That is the point of investigations. Right, he laughed, a dry, brittle sound. Secrets and shadows. Very noir. So, this task force. What is the mandate, generally speaking? He was fishing. He was casting a line out, desperate to see if the hook would catch on his own throat. Corruption, I said. Financial fraud, money laundering, the usual. Broad scope, Grant said. He swirled the ice in his glass. State level and federal cooperation. I added. I watched his pupil dilate. We are looking at how local investment firms move money for offshore entities. Grant stopped swirling his glass. He went very still. Investment firms, he repeated. Any specific sectors? Why do you ask? Grant, I asked, tilting my head. Are you worried about your portfolio? No, he said too quickly. No, of course not. Just professional curiosity. I manage a lot of assets. I like to know where the regulatory winds are blowing. The wind is blowing hard, I said, and it is blowing cold. He stared at me. He was trying to read me. He was trying to figure out if I knew. He was trying to figure out if my presence here was a coincidence or a raid. You know, Grant said, his voice dropping, becoming harder. This city is smaller than you think. Chloe, people talk. Reputations are fragile things, even for prosecutors. Is that a threat? Grant? It is advice, he said. Sometimes, when you dig too deep, the hole collapses on you. I brought a shovel, I said. And a helmet? He opened his mouth to say something else, something likely more aggressive, but a shadow fell over us. Is he bothering you? Victoria Hale was standing there. She did not look like a hostess. She looked like a queen defending her borders. She stood next to me, her shoulder brushing mine. She was taller than Grant in her heels, and she used every inch of it. Grant stepped back. The aggression drained out of him instantly, replaced by a sickly obsequiousness. Mrs. Hale, Grant said. No, not at all. Just family chat. Catching up? It looked intense, Victoria said. Her voice was ice. Chloe is my guest of honor. Grant, I would hate for her to feel cornered. Never, Grant said, raising his hands in surrender. We are all proud of her. Just saying, how proud we are. Good, Victoria said, because in this room, nobody has the right to make her feel small. Not tonight, not ever again. Grant nodded. He looked like he wanted to vomit. I should go find Lila. Excuse me. He retreated. He did not walk away with the swagger he had arrived with. He walked away like a man who knew the walls were closing in. Victoria watched him go, her expression dark. He is scared, she said. He should be, I said. Did he say anything? He asked about the task force jurisdiction, I said. He wanted to know if we were looking at investment firms. Victoria hummed. Interesting. She took my arm. Come on, I need a drink, and you need to get away from the family drama. We walked back toward the main floor. We passed a table of high-level donors, men who smelled of cigars and old money. They were deep in conversation, unaware that we were passing by. I am telling you, one man said, leaning in. The returns are consistently 18%. It is impossible in this market. But they deliver. Who is managing the feed? The other man asked. It goes through Hollis, the first man said. But the vehicle is the Aurora Trust. They say it is linked to real estate in Dubai, but the paperwork is minimal. I stopped. Victoria stopped with me. What is it? I gripped her arm. My heart skipped a beat, then slammed against my ribs. Aurora Trust. It was a name I had seen on a subpoena 3 days ago. It was a shell company registered in Nevis. It was the primary funnel for the money laundering operation I was investigating in Project Horizon. And the donor had just said it went through Hollis. Grant Hollis. I looked at the back of my brother-in-law's head as he moved through the crowd. It was not just that Grant was working with bad people. Grant was the funnel. My sister's husband. The man who had sneered at my salary. The man who had bought a mansion to prove his worth. Was the primary conduit for a $100 million fraud scheme. And the man who had walked in late the VIP. The older man with the leather face was likely the owner of the Aurora Trust. I looked at Victoria. My face must have been pale because she frowned. Chloe? She asked. The Aurora Trust, I whispered. That is the name. The name of what? The target, I said. Grant is not just an investor. Vic, he is the bagman. Victoria looked at Grant, then back at me. Her eyes widened. And he is sitting at the table with your parents, she said. Yes, I said. He is sitting right next to them. The reality of the night shifted again. I wasn't just here to prove a point. I was here witnessing a crime in progress, and my entire family was sitting in the splash zone. The man sitting at table 12, the one my brother-in-law had greeted with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever meeting its master, was named Marcus Thorne. To the general public, and likely to everyone in this ballroom, Thorne was a titan of commercial real estate. He was the kind of man who had buildings named after him and whose charitable donations were always large enough to ensure the press release ran on the front page. He was a pillar of the community, to me, and to the restricted folder on my secure laptop back at the bureau. Marcus Thorne was Subject Zero. He was the ghost I had been chasing for 6 months. He was the silent partner behind the Aurora Trust. He was the architect of a scheme that siphoned pension funds into offshore accounts, washed them clean through luxury property developments, and then funneled them back into the pockets of investors who asked no questions. And there he was, eating roast duck next to my mother. I felt a cold sweat break out along my hairline. The irony was so sharp it felt like a puncture wound. My family had spent the evening terrified that I would embarrass them with my cheap suit and my government salary. In reality, they were currently breaking bread with a man who was likely going to be indicted on 20 counts of wire fraud before Christmas. I could not say a word. The ethics rules of the Justice Bureau were ironclad. I could not confirm or deny the existence of an investigation. I could not tip off a target. I could not warn civilians, even if those civilians were my own foolish flesh and blood. If I spoke, I would lose my license. If I stayed silent, I watched my sister walk off a cliff. I watched Grant lean in to whisper something to Thorne. Thorne laughed, a dry rattling sound, and patted Grant's arm. It was a gesture of familiarity. It was the gesture of a mentor acknowledging a protege. Grant was not just an investor. He was in. He was deeper than I had suspected. I needed to move. I felt like I was suffocating. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. Victoria noticed immediately. She was in the middle of a conversation with the mayor, but her eyes snapped to mine. She saw the tension in my jaw. She excused herself smoothly and met me at the edge of the stage. "What is it?" Victoria asked, her voice low. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Worse," I said, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. I turned my back to the room so no one could read my lips. "Vic, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I cannot give you details. I cannot give you names. But there is a person in this room who makes me extremely uncomfortable." Victoria's eyes narrowed. She scanned the room over my shoulder. She was smart. She did not need me to draw a map. "Uncomfortable socially?" she asked. "Or uncomfortable professionally?" "Ethically," I said. "Morally, if I were you, I would ensure that no photographs are taken of Ethan shaking hands with the late arrival at table 12, and I would make sure he does not get near a microphone tonight." Victoria went very still. She understood the language of liability. I was telling her that her gala had been infiltrated by a radioactive element. "Understood," she said, her tone turning clipped and efficient. "I will handle the optics. I will keep Ethan at the other end of the room." "Thank you," I said. "Chloe," she added, touching my arm. "Is it bad?" "It is a catastrophe waiting for a subpoena," I said. Victoria nodded and moved away, her mission clear. I watched her intercept a photographer who was heading toward Thorne's table and redirect him toward the flower arrangements. I needed to breathe. I started to walk toward the terrace doors, needing the cold air, but I was intercepted. "He is amazing, isn't he?" Lila was standing in my path. She had returned from the restroom, and she had clearly reapplied her lipstick and her denial. She was holding a fresh glass of champagne, and her eyes were bright with a frantic, manic energy. She gestured toward the table 12. "Who?" I asked, though I knew. "Mr. Thorne," Lila said, saying the name like it was a prayer. "Grant introduced me. He is worth $500 million. Chloe, $500 million. And he loves Grant. He told me Grant is the sharpest financial mind he has met in 10 years. I felt a wave of nausea. "Lila, stop." "Why?" she challenged, her voice rising. She wanted a fight. She wanted to prove that despite my standing ovation, she still held the winning hand. "You think you are so special because some judges clapped for you. Grant is sitting with Marcus Thorne. Do you know what kind of doors that opens? Grant has been consulting for his private fund for months. He manages the liquidity for their charitable giving." My blood ran cold. "He manages the liquidity," I repeated. "Yes," Lila beamed, oblivious to the noose she was tying around her own neck. "He moves the money. He makes sure it gets where it needs to go. It is very complex. You probably wouldn't understand the nuance of high-level asset management." She was confessing. She was standing in the middle of a ballroom, surrounded by witnesses, confessing that her husband was the bagman for a money laundering operation. He moves the money. That was exactly what we needed to prove intent. And she was shouting it to brag. I grabbed her arm. I did not do it gently. I gripped her bicep with enough force that she gasped and dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, but the sound was swallowed by the music. "Come with me," I said. "Let go of me," Lila hissed, trying to pull away. "You are hurting me." "I am about to save your life," I said through gritted teeth. "Walk." I dragged her. I did not care about the stairs. I did not care about the scene. I pulled her through the crowd, past the curious eyes of the donors, and shoved her into a small service corridor that led to the kitchen. It was quiet here, smelling of sanitizer and coffee. I pinned her with a look. "You need to stop talking," I said. "Right now. You need to stop saying Grant's name in the same sentence as Marcus Thorne. You need to stop bragging about him moving money." Lila rubbed her arm, her face twisting into a sneer. "Oh my God, you are pathetic. You are actually jealous. You cannot stand it, can you? You cannot stand that while you are playing cop, Grant is actually playing in the big leagues. You want me to be quiet because you hate that I am winning. This is not a game, Lila," I snapped. my voice echoing off the tile walls. There is no winning here. There is only survival. Do you understand what you are doing? You are linking your husband to a man who... I stopped. I caught myself. I could not say it. A man who what? Lila taunted. A man who is richer than you will ever be. A man who respects Grant. A man who is dangerous, I said, improvising. A man who uses people, Lila. Look at me. I am not speaking to you as the assistant district attorney. I am speaking to you as your sister. Do not attach your name to that table. Do not let them photograph you with him. You are just trying to scare me, she said, her voice wavering slightly but her chin held high. You want to ruin my night because you are bitter. Mom was right. You just want to bring everyone down to your level. I am trying to keep you out of prison, I wanted to scream, but I swallowed the words. Please, I said, changing tactics. I lowered my voice. I tried to sound pleading. Please, just trust me for once. I see things you don't see. Grant is in over his head. If you keep broadcasting his involvement, you are going to get hurt. Lila laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Grant is a partner. He is not in over his head. He is the one holding the keys. And you are just... jealous. She is not jealous, Lila. The voice came from the doorway. We both turned. Victoria was standing there. She had followed us. She stood in the frame of the door, blocking the light from the ballroom. Her face was not the face of a friend. It was the face of a woman who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. Mrs. Hale, Lila stammered, instantly changing her demeanor. I am so sorry. Chloe was just having a moment. Chloe is not having a moment, Victoria said, stepping into the corridor. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing us in. She is trying to give you a lifeline, and you are too busy checking your reflection to grab it. Lila blinked. I don't understand. Victoria looked at Lila with a mixture of pity and disdain. You are standing in a room full of sharks, Lila. You are bragging about bleeding in the water. Chloe pulled you out here so you wouldn't become chum. She is protecting you from a scandal that will leave you with nothing. Scandal, Lila whispered. The word terrified her. Scandal was the only thing she feared more than poverty. Grant is not who you think he is, Victoria said. And the man he is sitting with, he is a liability. If I were you, I would stop talking about financial consulting and start thinking about plausible deniability. Lila went pale. She looked from Victoria to me. She saw the unity in our stance. She saw the serious, grim expressions on our faces. The bubble of her delusion finally popped. What do you know? Lila whispered. What is going on? Before I could answer, the service door swung open again. Grant Hollis stumbled in. He looked frantic. He had seen us leave. He had seen Victoria follow. He knew that a conversation between his wife, an assistant district attorney, and the congressman's wife in a secluded hallway was the most dangerous thing that could happen to him. Lila, Grant said, breathless. There you are. Mr. Thorne is asking for us. We need to go back. He reached for her hand. Lila pulled back. It was a small movement, just an inch, but it was violent in its significance. She looked at his hand as if it were covered in mud. Grant, she said, her voice trembling, what exactly do you do for the Aurora Trust? Grant froze. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a special effect. His eyes darted to me, then to Victoria. He saw the trap. He heard the name Aurora Trust, a name that was not on the program, a name that was buried in shell companies, and he knew that I knew. I handle their portfolio, Grant stammered. His charm was gone. His polish had cracked, revealing the terrified, sweaty man underneath. Just standard asset allocation. Why? Because, Victoria said, her voice cool and detached. My husband does not associate with the Aurora Trust, and if you are wise, Grant, you will stop associating my gala with it, too. Grant looked like he was going to be sick. He looked at me, pleading silently. He was begging me not to say the words. He was begging me not to end his life right there in the hallway. I looked at him. I felt no pity. I only felt a cold resolve. Take Lila home, Grant, I said. Leave the gala. Now. I can't, he whispered. Thorne, he expects us to stay. I don't care what he expects, I said. If you stay, you drag my sister down with you. Get her out of here. Grant swallowed hard. He looked at Lila. Lila was looking at him with horror. She was putting the pieces together, my warnings. Victoria's coldness. Grant's terror. Grant, Lila said. What did you do? Nothing. He snapped. Too loud. We are leaving. Come on. He grabbed her arm, roughly this time, and pulled her toward the exit door that led to the parking garage, bypassing the ballroom entirely. Lila stumbled after him, looking back at me with eyes wide with confusion and fear. They were gone. I let out a breath I'd been holding for 5 minutes. I leaned against the tiled wall, my legs shaking. You handled that well, Victoria said quietly. I just tipped him off, I said, rubbing my temples. He knows I know. He's going to panic. Good, Victoria said. Panicked men make mistakes, and Thorne will see him leave. He will know the link is broken. Or he will think Grant flipped, I said darkly. Victoria opened the door back to the ballroom. Come on. You need to be seen. If you disappear now, people will talk. I followed her back into the light. The party was still raging. The music was playing. My parents were still sitting at table 12, oblivious, making polite conversation with the empty chairs where Lila and Grant had been. I walked back to my seat. I picked up my water glass. My hand was trembling. A waiter appeared at my elbow. He was young, with acne scars and a nervous demeanor. He placed a fresh napkin on the table next to my hand. Excuse me, ma'am, he mumbled. You dropped this? I hadn't dropped anything. I looked at him, but he was already walking away, disappearing into the kitchen. I looked down at the napkin. It was not a cloth napkin. It was a piece of heavy cardstock, folded in half. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I opened the note. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. It was written in black marker. They know you are here. They know who you are. Be careful. I stared at the words. The letters seemed to vibrate. Who sent this? The waiter, a rogue staff member, or someone inside Thorne's circle who had a conscience. I looked across the room at table 12. Marcus Thorne was watching me. He was not eating. He was not talking to my parents. He was staring directly at me across the expanse of the ballroom. He raised his wineglass in a slow, deliberate toast. He knew. Grant had not needed to say anything. My presence, my pulling Lila away, the look on my face, it was all the confirmation a man like Thorne needed. I folded the note and slipped it into my bra. I was not just an unwanted guest anymore. I was an active threat, and the most dangerous man in the city had just acknowledged it. I took a sip of water. Let them come. I thought, I had the evidence. I had the law. And now, I had a warning. I checked the time. It was 10 o'clock. The gala had 2 hours left. 2 hours to survive in a room with the enemy. The morning sun hit my face at 6:30, but my phone had been awake for hours. It was vibrating against the nightstand with a relentlessness that felt like an assault. I rolled over, my head pounding not from alcohol, but from the sheer emotional hangover of the previous night. I picked up the device and squinted at the screen. There were 42 missed calls. There were 112 text messages. My email inbox, usually a repository for dry legal briefs and scheduling conflicts, was overflowing with subject lines that screamed for attention. The world, it seemed, had discovered Chloe Alexander. I sat up and scrolled through the notifications. It was a digital avalanche. Colleagues I had not spoken to in 5 years were suddenly remembering my birthday. A partner at a firm that had rejected my application a decade ago sent a message asking if I was open to a lunch meeting. Legal blogs and local news feeds were circulating clips of Victoria's speech. One headline from a prominent legal gossip site read, "The shadow prosecutor, who is the mystery woman, the Hale dynasty stood for." I groaned and dropped the phone back onto the mattress. I hated this. I hated the noise. I hated the spotlight. In my line of work, Anonymity was armor. If people did not know who you were, they did not know to hide their assets from you. Now, my face was circulating on social media feeds alongside the congressman and his wife. I was trending, but as I forced myself out of bed and started the coffee maker, I realized there was a silver lining to this storm of unwanted attention. My phone buzzed again. It was a secure message from Miller, my bureau chief. Project Horizon file is on your desk. The Attorney General wants an update by noon. The exposure has forced their hand. We are moving up the timeline. I smiled grimly as I watched the coffee drip into the pot. The publicity was a double-edged sword, but the blade was currently cutting in my favor. The powers that be could no longer slow-walk my investigation into the Aurora Trust. They could not bury a case led by a prosecutor who had just been publicly anointed by the political elite. The gala had given me leverage. I showered, dressed in my usual charcoal suit, and drove to the office. I took a different route, checking my mirrors every 3 blocks. The note from the waiter. "They know who you are" was burned into my mind. I was not paranoid. I was prepared. When I walked into the bureau, the atmosphere had shifted. Usually, I walked to my cubicle unnoticed. Today, heads turned, the receptionist, a woman who had never learned my first name in 2 years, smiled and waved. Junior associates whispered as I passed. It was unnerving. I reached my desk. It was exactly as I had left it, piled high with manila folders, the cheap ergonomic chair askew. But there was a difference. The file for Project Horizon had been moved to the center of the desk, and it had grown thicker. I sat down and opened it. New subpoenas had been approved overnight. Bank records that had been stalled in bureaucratic limbo for weeks were suddenly available. The system was bending because the spotlight was hot. I was deep into a forensic audit of a shell company in Nevis when I heard the click of heels on the linoleum floor. These were not the sensible loafers of a government lawyer. These were expensive heels. The rhythm was hesitant, unsure. I looked up. Lila was standing at the entrance to my cubicle row. She looked out of place. Her cream-colored cashmere coat and designer handbag looked alien against the backdrop of gray dividers and flickering fluorescent lights. She was wearing large sunglasses, even though we were indoors. She looked like a celebrity trying to visit a prison without being recognized. She took off her sunglasses when she saw me. Her eyes were puffy. She had not slept. "So," Lila said, her voice small, "this is it." "This is it," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Welcome to the glamour of public service." Lila looked around. She took in the peeling paint on the filing cabinets. She saw the stack of cold case files on the floor. She saw the half-eaten bagel on Leo's desk across from mine. It was stark, cold, and utterly lacking in the aesthetic beauty she built her life around. "It is small," she said. "It is functional," I replied. "We do not have a budget for mood lighting." Lila stepped into my cubicle. She did not sit down. There was only one spare chair, and it was covered in evidence boxes. She stood there, clutching her bag like a shield. "I didn't think it would look like this," she admitted. "When you said you worked for the government, I pictured, I don't know, mahogany, flags, something important." "Importance isn't about the furniture, Lila," I said. "It is about the work." She looked at the file on my desk. She saw the seal of the Justice Bureau. She saw the red stamp that said, "Confidential." "I am sorry," she said. The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Lila did not apologize. Lila justified. Lila explained. But she rarely apologized. "For what?" I asked. "For the gala? Or for the last 3 years?" "For making you a prop," she said, her voice cracking. "I stood there last night, watching everyone clap for you, and I realized something terrible. I didn't want you to fail because I hated you. I wanted you to fail because if you were failing, then I was winning. I needed you to be the mess so I could be the success." I looked at her. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. "I know," I said softly. "I told everyone you were struggling." She continued, tears welling up in her eyes. I used your life as a punchline to make my life seem perfect. And then I walked in here, and I see this reality. You are not struggling. Chloe, you are fighting a war. And I have been over here worrying about flower arrangements. We all choose our battles, I said. No, Lila shook her head. I didn't choose a battle. I chose a costume. And last night, when Grant... She stopped. The name hung between us like a curse. What about Grant? I asked, my voice sharpening. Lila looked away. He didn't come home last night, after we left the gala. He dropped me off. He said he had to go to the office. He said he had to manage a crisis. He looked terrified. Chloe, I have never seen him like that. I knew exactly why Grant was terrified. He was scrubbing servers. He was shredding documents. He was trying to erase a digital trail that I had already copied 3 weeks ago. Lila, I said, standing up, I need you to listen to me. I do not need you to be proud of me. I do not need you to brag about my job to your friends. I do not care about the applause. Then what do you want? She asked. I want you to respect my choices, I said. And I want you to stop lying about who I am to make yourself feel better. I am not a tragedy. I am a prosecutor, and right now, I am the only person standing between your husband and a federal indictment. Lila flinched. Is it that bad? It is worse, I said. Grant isn't just an investor. He is a conduit. And the man he was sitting with last night, Marcus Thorne, he is not a friend. He is a shark who will eat Grant alive to save himself. Lila's face crumbled. She reached out and touched the edge of my desk, steadying herself. He told me not to talk to you. He called me this morning. He said you were dangerous. He said you were jealous and trying to wreck our marriage. I am not trying to wreck your marriage, I said. I am trying to keep you from being named as a co-conspirator. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked at it and jumped. It is him, she whispered. Answer it, I said. But do not tell him you are here. Lila stared at the screen, then silenced the call. I can't talk to him right now. He lied to me. Chloe, he told me the money was clean. He told me the Aurora Trust was for orphans. Orphans, I snorted. That is rich. It is for tax evasion and laundering bribes. Lila looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. What do I do? Go home, I said. Pack a bag. Go to Mom and Dad's house. Do not tell Grant where you are going. Just say you need space. Stay away from your house phone. Stay off your email. Mom and Dad are going to ask questions, she said. Let them, I said. Tell them nothing. Just get safe. Lila nodded. She looked at me one last time, and for a moment, the sister I used to play tag with in the backyard was there, beneath the layers of Botox and insecurity. Thank you, she whispered, for not hating me. I don't have time to hate you, I said. I have work to do. She left. The office felt quieter without her perfume. 10 minutes later, my own phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, a burner phone, or a line from a private office. I picked it up. Alexander. Chloe. The voice was smooth, cultured, and laced with a toxic sweetness. It was Grant. Grant, I said. I signaled to Leo across the aisle. He saw my face and immediately put on his headset, ready to trace the call if need be, though I knew Grant was smart enough to use an encrypted line. I noticed Lila is not answering her phone, Grant said. I was wondering if she called you. She is my sister, I said. We talk. Right, Grant said. Listen, Chloe, I wanted to apologize for last night. Things got tense. I think there was a misunderstanding. I think you might have the wrong impression about my business dealings. I do not work on impressions. Grant, I said, typing a note on my screen. I work on evidence. Evidence is a tricky thing, he said, his voice dropping lower. Sometimes it can be misinterpreted. Sometimes people look into things they do not understand, and they get hurt, professionally. I mean, Are you threatening an assistant district attorney on a recorded line, Grant? I asked calmly. No, no, he laughed. But the laugh was brittle. I am just offering family advice. I have friends, Chloe, powerful friends, friends who can make career paths difficult. I would hate for you to lose that momentum you gained last night because you dug into a hole that has nothing at the bottom. You are assuming I am digging, I said. Maybe I am already done digging. Maybe I am just waiting to pour the cement. There was a silence on the other end, a long, heavy silence. You should be careful, Grant said finally. The veneer of politeness was gone. Marcus Thorne is a very private man. He does not like people prying into his charitable trusts, and he does not like it when family members become liabilities. I am not the liability, Grant, I said, letting my voice turn to steel. You brought him to a public gala. You shook his hand in front of cameras. You put him on the radar. If he is angry, he is not angry at me. He is angry at the man who exposed him. I heard his breath hitch. I had hit the nerve. Do you think you know the law better than me? I asked. Do you think you can talk your way out of a forensic audit? Because I have seen your signature on the transfer documents. Grant, I have seen the dates. You are bluffing, he whispered. Am I? Asked. How is the weather in the Caymans this time of year? Or do you prefer the banking privacy of Nevis? Grant hung up. I lowered the phone. My hand was steady. I looked at Leo. Did you get that? Encrypted, Leo said, pulling off his headphones. But I got the duration and the origin tower. He is downtown, near the Thorn Tower. Of course he is, I muttered. He is running to Daddy to ask for help. My phone buzzed again. A text message. I braced myself for another threat. But it was from Victoria. I spoke to Ethan. We reviewed the guest list and the security footage. We are issuing a statement this afternoon distancing the Congressman from the Aurora Trust. Ethan is furious. He said if anyone thinks they can use his wife's charity event as a shield for their dirty money, they are going to learn a very hard lesson in politics. I typed back. Grant just called me. He is rattling the cage. Victoria replied instantly. Let him rattle. The lock is already on the door. Ethan made a call to the district attorney. You have air cover. Chloe, go get them. I set the phone down. The noise of the morning, the texts, the fame, the family drama faded away. All that was left was the file on my desk. Grant was scared. Lila was safe. Victoria and Ethan were on board. I opened the folder labeled Subject Thorn, Marcus. The time for speeches and galas was over. The time for family feuds was over. Now, it was just the law. And I was going to use it to tear their house down, brick by golden brick. I picked up my pen. It was time to write the ending. The weeks following the gala were not filled with champagne toasts or victory laps. They were filled with the grinding, unglamorous friction of federal justice. The file on my desk, the one labeled Project Horizon, had grown from a few inches thick to a tower of boxes that lined the wall of my office. We had traced the money. It was not a complex web. In the end, it was arrogant. Marcus Thorne and his associates had believed that their political contributions and their charity dinners were a shield that deflected regulatory oversight. They believed that people like me, people who worked in windowless offices for five-figure salaries, were too slow or too stupid to catch them. They were wrong. The key to the entire operation was the signature on the transfer authorization forms for the Aurora Trust. It was the hand that moved the money from the legitimate accounts into the shadow corporations in Nevis. That hand belonged to Grant Hollis. I sat in a quiet booth at a diner halfway between my office and the house my sister used to share with her husband. I had asked Lila to meet me there. I told her to come alone. I told her to leave her phone in her car. When she walked in, she looked 10 years older than she had at the gala. The shine was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she was wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. She looked like the college student she used to be before she decided that status was a career path. I slid a single piece of paper across the Formica table. It was a photocopy of a wire transfer authorization. What is this? Lila asked, her voice raspy. That is a transfer for $2 million. I said. It moved money from a pension fund for municipal workers into a private holding company controlled by Marcus Thorne. Look at the signature, Lila. She looked. I watched her eyes trace the loops and sharp angles of the handwriting she knew better than anyone. Grant, she whispered. He is not just an investor, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. He is the signatory. He is the one legally responsible for the theft. The FBI is going to execute a search warrant on your home on Tuesday morning. They are coming for his laptop. They are coming for his files. Lila went pale. She reached for her water glass, but her hand shook so badly she had to set it back down. Am I? She started, then swallowed hard. Am I going to jail? That depends on what you do in the next 24 hours, I said. I reviewed your financials. Your name is not on the Aurora documents. You have plausible deniability, but only if you separate yourself from him now, if you stay, if you help him hide assets, if you lie to the agents, you become a co-conspirator. I leaned forward. I am not asking you to divorce him because I hate him, I said. I am telling you that you are standing on a bridge that is collapsing. You need to run. Lila stared at the paper. She stared at the signature of the man she had married, the man she had thought was her ticket to a perfect life. She realized then that the life she was so proud of, the house, the cars, the galas, was all bought with stolen money. It was not high society, it was high crimes. He told me he was protecting us, Lila said, a tear sliding down her cheek. He was using you, I said brutally. He used your desire for status to blind you. He thought you would never ask questions as long as the checks cleared. He was right, wasn't he? Lila looked at me. For a moment, I saw a flash of anger, but it died instantly, replaced by shame. Yes, she admitted. He was right. She stood up. She picked up her purse. She did not take the paper. I am going to Mom's, she said. Good, I said. Do not tell him I warned you. Just go. 2 days later, the hammer fell. It was not dramatic. There were no helicopters or SWAT teams kicking down doors. It was just a line of dark sedans pulling up to the Hollis residence at 6 a.m. Grant was arrested in his silk pajamas. He tried to call Marcus Thorne. Thorne did not answer. He tried to call the Congressman. That was his biggest mistake. Grant tried to spin the narrative. He had his lawyer release a statement claiming that this was a political witch hunt, implying that his connection to the Hale family was the real target. He tried to use his proximity to Victoria and Ethan as a shield, hoping that they would intervene to avoid a scandal. He underestimated Victoria Hale. An hour after Grant's statement went live, Ethan Hale held a press conference. He stood on the steps of the Capitol, with Victoria right beside him. Transparency is the bedrock of democracy, Ethan said into the bank of microphones. We were distressed to learn that individuals may have used our charitable initiatives to mask illegal activities. My wife and I are cooperating fully with the State Anti-Corruption Task Force. We have provided all guest lists and communication logs to the lead prosecutor. If anyone thinks they can buy immunity by shaking my hand, they are sorely mistaken. It was a death blow. Grant was isolated. The society friends he had bragged about, the donors he had courted, the people he thought were his peers, vanished. They deleted his number. They unfollowed his accounts. They treated him like he was contagious. The realization hit my parents hard. They had spent years believing that the invite list to the Meridian Grand was the ultimate measure of a person's worth. They believed that knowing the right people protected you. Now, they watched as those right people threw their son-in-law to the wolves to save themselves. They watched as the status they worshipped crumbled under the weight of a federal indictment. The only thing that stood firm was the law, and the daughter they had hidden away. The arraignment hearing was 3 weeks later. I was not the prosecutor on record for the initial hearing that would be a conflict of interest, but I was in the back of the courtroom. I needed to see it finished. Grant was led in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. It was ill-fitting, without his tailored suit, without his expensive watch. without the arrogance that usually armored him. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. He scanned the room. He saw Lila sitting in the second row. She was wearing black. She did not look at him. She stared straight ahead at the judge. Then he saw me. His eyes locked onto mine. There was no hatred in them anymore. There was only resignation. He knew that I had not done this to him out of spite. I had not planted the evidence. I had not forged his signature. I had simply turned on the lights in a room he wanted to keep dark. He had built his own trap. I just sprung it. The judge read the charges: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit theft. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked. "Guilty," his lawyer said. It was a plea deal. He was turning on Marcus Thorne. He was giving up the big fish to save himself from 20 years in federal prison. He would still serve time, likely 5 to 7 years, but he had chosen survival over loyalty. I walked out of the courtroom before the sentencing date was set. The air outside was cold and clean. Lila found me on the courthouse steps. She looked tired, but she looked steady. The frantic energy of the social climber was gone. She was working now, helping at an art gallery, making her own money for the first time in her life. She was living in a small apartment, not unlike mine. "He looked so small," Lila said, staring at the closed doors of the courthouse. "Guilt is heavy," I said. "It weighs you down." Lila turned to me. She adjusted her scarf. "I wanted to hate you. You know, when the police came, when the bank accounts were frozen, I wanted to blame you for ruining my life." "I know," I said. "But then I realized," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "If you hadn't pulled me into that hallway, if you hadn't warned me, I would be in there with him. I would be wearing orange. I would have lost everything, including my freedom." She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was strong. "You didn't ruin me, Chloe," she said. "You saved me." I squeezed her hand back. "That is what big sisters do." Lila smiled, a sad, genuine smile. "I am proud of you. I really am. I should have said it 3 years ago." It was the sentence I had waited 3 years to hear. I thought it would feel like a victory, like a trophy I could put on a shelf. But standing there in the cold, it just felt like peace. It felt like a wound finally closing. "Thank you," I said. The final act of the drama did not happen in a courtroom. It happened 2 months later. In the auditorium of the State Justice Building, I was being sworn in as the director of the State Anti-Corruption Task Force. It was a formal ceremony. The governor was there. The attorney general was there. Victoria and Ethan Hale were in the front row, beaming like proud parents. But my eyes were on the 2 people sitting next to them, my mother and father. They looked different. My father was not posturing for the other guests. He was sitting quietly, his hands folded in his lap. My mother was not scanning the room to see who was watching her. She was watching me. She was wearing a simple navy dress. She looked older, perhaps, but softer. The scandal with Grant had humbled them. It had stripped away the pretense. They had lost their standing in the high society circles, but they had gained something else: clarity. The Attorney General stepped up to the podium. "We live in a world where it is easy to choose the path of least resistance," he said, his voice booming through the hall. "It is easy to look away. It is easy to chase profit over principle. But today, we honor a woman who chose the hard path, a woman who walked away from personal gain to serve the public good." He looked at me. "I call upon Chloe Alexander to take the oath." I walked up the stairs. I placed my hand on the Bible. I raised my right hand. I swore to uphold the Constitution. I swore to protect the innocent. I swore to pursue justice without fear or favor. When I finished, the room erupted. I looked down at the front row. My father was wiping his eyes. He wasn't hiding it. He wasn't pretending it was allergies. He was crying. My mother stood up. She walked to the edge of the stage as I came down the stairs. She didn't care about protocol. She didn't care about the cameras. She took my face in her hands. Her hands were warm. "Chloe," she whispered, Her voice was trembling. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I am sorry," she said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 silent dinners. "I looked at you for years, and I thought you were lost. I thought you were throwing your life away." She looked back at the podium, then back at me. "I was not looking at you," she said, tears spilling over. "I was looking at myself. I wanted you to be something I could show off. I didn't realize you were already something I should have been learning from." She pulled me into a hug. It was not the stiff, polite hug of a socialite. It was the desperate, fierce hug of a mother who almost lost her child to her own vanity. "You were right," she whispered into my ear. "And I was wrong. I measured you with the wrong ruler. Chloe, and I am so sorry." I held her. I looked over her shoulder at the room. I saw Victoria winking at me. I saw Lila smiling through her tears. I saw the badge on my chest reflecting the lights. "It is okay, Mom," I said. "We are here now." And as the applause washed over us, I realized the truth. I did not need their applause to know I was right. I did not need the title or the office or the standing ovation to know my worth. I had known it in the quiet nights at the office. I had known it when I signed the subpoenas. I had known it when I walked away from the big firm. But feeling their arms around me, hearing my name spoken with respect by the people who had once whispered it with shame, it felt light. The heavy coat of disappointment I had worn for 3 years finally slipped off my shoulders. I was Chloe Alexander. I was a prosecutor. I was a sister. I was a daughter. And for the first time in a long time, I was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Helena Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Chloe's journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next video.